Hello, friends, and welcome back to r/Entitled People. Sit comfortably because today we have another set of crazy stories for you. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. And our first story will tell you why you shouldn't mess with neighbors' property. Here we go. My father agreed. This was a long time ago, but I remember it clearly. We moved into a community with tight space in between our house and our neighbors, and we didn't like them being able to see into our kitchen. We put up a bunch of plants costing thousands, but my parents thought it'd be worth it. A week later, my parents awoke to the plants completely chopped down. My father was furious and marched down to the neighbor's house. He told my father the plants were on his property line, therefore he had total right to take them down. He warned that if anything were to go on his property again, he would report us to the authorities immediately. Later that day, my father called the company that put in the plants, and with the warranty, we could have them replanted next week for no charge. We made sure there was no way it was on our neighbor's property. However, a few days later, we caught him chopping them down at 2 a.m. We called the police for obstruction of property, and after a chat with my neighbor, he decided to call a professional and mark his property line. My father agreed. A few days later, I got home to find orange tape in my neighbor's yard. Apparently, his fence was 11 feet over our property line. We watched as he took down his fence, completely furious. Within the next month, we were enjoying our new space and privacy in our backyard, and my neighbor ended up losing a quarter of his backyard. My neighbor ended up having to pay almost $10,000 for the destruction of our property, and we got to plant our plants again. And our next story. The girl Friday with the PhD takes over the business from ungrateful owner. My spouse was the second person hired at a consulting company in a very specialized industry. In her 15 years with the firm, it grew to a respectable 3-office, 8 to 10 employees at each location entity. She and the owner grew the business on the contacts, expertise, and presentation of my wife, to the extent that my wife's abilities and education were the main reason new business came through the door. Over the years, her scope of responsibility grew so that the owner was basically 75% absent and mostly unaware of day-to-day activity. As he got more and more removed from the business, he would make overtures that he would eventually retire and sell her the business. He was so dependent on her income generating that he took out a life insurance policy on her. I didn't involve myself too much, but at a major industry dinner party I attended with her, he introduced my wife to the table as my girl Friday, basically a secretary, which was weird. Over the years, she tried to get an agreement in place to buy the firm, even if it was years away. He always delayed and made promises but never followed through. I told her, this guy doesn't respect you or your contribution. He'll never sell you the business because there's no reason to. He can make more money by stringing you along, and essentially, you are the business. Why would he sell it to you? One day, out of the blue, my wife received a raise and bonus, a very minor amount of money, and a contract that included a non-compete, non-disclosure agreement. After reading it, she realized that the owner was trying to lock her down from leaving for another firm. She'd been getting feelers from other companies. To make things even more suspicious, she received a call from a competitor who said they were in the final stages of due diligence and they wanted to meet her. The a-hole was selling the company and didn't think to tell her or ask if she was interested in buying it. She ignored the agreement and there were no other agreements in place. She was totally free. My wife is extremely loyal. She'd missed so many special days working for this guy, stuck around when they were wobbly, even skipped paychecks when there were tough financial times. She was furious, the absolute maddest I've ever seen her. We discussed starting her own firm, and I asked how much business is contractually obligated to stay there if you leave. It turned out that most agreements were either handshake or 30-day at will. I also asked how many would leave with you. She said about 75%, including her biggest source of revenue, who didn't even know the owner. In a very short time, my wife took a 3-week vacation. She had months of unused time, during which time she rented an office in the same building and made all the arrangements to set up a new shop. She agreed to leave any and all company property behind and do her best to give the old company no obvious ammo for litigation. She called her clients and said, "I'm leaving. If you want to look into relocating your account with my new company, you'll need to quit the old one before we can discuss it." Most understood the implication. While she was on vacation, she received a panicked call from her boss. "We lost XYZ company. Do you know anything about it?" She said, "I'm sorry, but I just sent you an email. I've resigned. All my keys and company stuff is on my desk. Bye-bye." The new firm took basically 90% of the business and seamlessly transitioned into the same company as it was before, but with a new owner. Even most of the office staff would come aboard. Within a year, her old company closed down except for the small office her old boss ran. She sees him once in a while and he just scowls at her. Serves the idiot right. Companies should value their employees. And our next story. Height approved. It was about 25 years ago, so I was about 8, and we had just moved into a 150-year-old house that was in need of major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he'd need a large garage/workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart and needed to be torn down. My dad figured this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was the plan. We'd met and were on good terms with all the neighbors at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbors as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbors whose property the current barn and new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 feet high, and they asked if we could only build it one story, 12 feet max, as to not block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem, my parents agreed. They'd wanted to go 2 stories for the extra storage, but just one wasn't a deal breaker. So the old barn was torn down and the foundation laid for the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day, my brother and I were playing street hockey and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us. "Get off the road, you half-breed craps!" My dad's black, so we're both half-black. "You gotta earn your place in this town." Upon hearing this, my mom had to physically restrain my dad from going over and beating the living crap out of him. Eventually, he cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for one story went out the window. Soon, the new garage that was supposed to be one story gained a second in the blueprints. If they were going to direct racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As construction started, the Peters came over to ask why there were 2 stories being built and were told to go F themselves. We didn't hear from them again until the roof started to go on. The bylaws of the township limited all outstructures to 24 feet high. The Peters called the township and then a building inspector, claiming that the new garage was over 24 feet high. If it was over height, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there watching the inspector with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, we get the report back from the township and the inspector, 23 feet 11 inches, just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He sent me up on the roof of the garage, just plywood, no shingles yet, with some spray paint, and had me write 23 feet 11 inches, height approved, in 2-foot-high neon orange letters across the entire roof, facing their yard and house. Not only did the garage block all sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything else was done before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. We didn't hear a peep from them for the next 10 years until they moved. And our next story. Failed to fix your tenant's unsecured front door? Get put on blast by the local news. So a couple months ago, while away from my apartment, I got a phone call from the leasing office asking if I was inside my apartment. I said no. They said that I needed to stay away from the apartment until they called to let me know it was safe to go back. Naturally worried, I asked why. They said that a man had broken into the building's attic and had managed to use the attic access in my apartment to enter my apartment and was now barricaded inside. After about a 6-hour standoff, the police kicked open my front door and pulled the guy out. As a temporary fix for the door, maintenance put a new strike plate on the remaining splintered door frame so that I could at least close it. Thinking that they would return the next day to complete the repair, I was cool with this. Now, the temporary strike plate only allowed me to close my door, but wasn't actually securing it. The broken door frame that it was screwed to made it so that a little bit of weight applied to my door would rip the whole thing apart again and allow easy access to my apartment. Obviously not secured or a long-term solution. After calling and talking to the management in person just about every other day for 4 weeks without anyone coming to fix my door, I decided that enough was enough. I needed a secured door for my apartment. The office kept saying, "We're working on it," without any actual repairs attempted. So I decided to go to my local news station, which has a Consumer Report investigative team. This same news station had reported on the initial incident the month prior and were very willing to do the follow-up story. They came out, took some video, and did an interview with me. Then they tried talking to the management, but ended up getting kicked off the property. They put together a beautiful segment for their nightly news that perfectly displayed the incompetency of this leasing company. Watching it was a very beautiful moment of revenge for me. The next day, the entire maintenance crew was at my apartment and replaced the whole door and frame with a shiny new one. Do what you gotta do. Well done. It's not hard to fix a door. They should have had that done in a day or two. Seriously. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.